Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for FI Live beta version, episode 2. I'm sorry we're starting a few minutes late. I forgot to click the live button. That's why it's FI beta. Thank you for joining all of us. My name's Susan Choi. As I said before, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of FI Live. So excited for this episode 2. We're talking about co-ops, cooperatives, talking about organizations that give power to the people. I'm going to show a little definition here: a farm, business, or other organization which is owned and run jointly by members who share the profits or benefits. I mean, sounds great to me. And they're not a new concept. Let me run a couple names by you. Ocean Spray, Sunkist, Cabot Creamery, Ace Hardware, Blue Diamond Almonds. Not a shopping list. These are names of successful organizations that are co-ops. So they haven't gone anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Seems like they're here to stay. We're going to talk about what they are, why they're making a comeback. That's why we've named this live stream the Comeback Kids Co-ops. Let's get into it. Let's bring out our guests. First off, the guy who's got my back, fellow FI reporter, podcasting star, Chris Campbell. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Susan. I know the first one I was on vacation, so I didn't get to be a part of FI Live Beta 1, but really excited to be here for the second edition. And like you said before, we're really taking a look at an interesting wrinkle for co-ops. We do have a bunch of companies that we just mentioned there, but, for delivery and for food service, I'm not too familiar with too many. So really interested to see what our guests have to say about the topic today.
Yeah, I stand in agreement with that. All right, let's keep going. Let's bring in John Sewell. The man, the myth, the legend, LoCo Co-ops, disrupting the delivery industry. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Susan.
My pleasure. And last but not least, the guy who's making it happen in the restaurant industry from the ground up, bringing power in from the ground up, Jason Wiener of Main Street Phoenix Project. Thank you so much for joining us, Jason.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's get into it. Let's start off with you, Jason. Let's get into Main Street Phoenix Project, what it is, why you started it, whole backstory, and also get into, you have a connection with John as well.
Yeah, well, I wear several hats. I play several roles. So in my private practice, John's a client of mine, and we only came to really know of each other in the context of cooperatives, and we've become strong allies as we both try to unseat some of the monopolies here in the space. But the Main Street Phoenix Project was quite literally born out of the pandemic. It was born in my mind on March 20th, 2020, 3 days into the pandemic, when it was clear that all of our beloved community restaurants were either going to crash and die or become ever more fragile. And what that meant for workers was incredibly sad and not at all inevitable. But the product of a long history of not properly protecting workers and protecting independent restaurants. And as we all saw, for lease signs and closure signs in these restaurants, the very identity of our main streets went into jeopardy. And so the Main Street Phoenix Project was born to take the successes of private equity and take their strategy of swooping in moments of vulnerability and disruption to make major strides, consolidate industry. But we thought, well, let's do this upside down. Let's do this for the benefit of workers. Let's buy distressed restaurants, consolidate them with industry powerhouse leadership into a holding group that isn't owned for the benefit of investors. It's not owned for the hedge funds and private equity folks who have all made a killing in every recession. Let's, in fact, generate that upside for the workers. Let's make their jobs secure. Let's give them happy, healthy places to work. Let's build value, job security, and economic resilience for workers who have, frankly, been left out of economic protection and statutory protection since Jim Crow. And here we are, as of Monday. We are now a portfolio company. We have 2 assets, 2 companies, independent restaurants and coffee shops in the Denver area. We currently have about a little over 30 employees under management, and we're well on our way to bringing these folks into the fold of ownership.
It's awesome. Yeah. And you mentioned as you wear many hats, you have a client in John, which is awesome. John, let's slide on over to you, and why don't you get the spotlight for a second? Tell us all about LoCo co-ops.
Actually, probably today I'm representing a company called LoCo. LoCo formed a joint venture with an IT platform to create a new company. But I've been in this space for several years, and I think while Jason may have seen the opportunity coming up or the need coming up immediately following the pandemic, I was working on this. Sorry about that. I was working on this for several years, forming co-ops, because we've been independent restaurants have been under siege by Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber Eats for some time. And they were failing at record numbers because of that. And the pandemic only made it worse. It exacerbated it. Once I know I've got a biased opinion here, but I think restaurants were thrown under the bus more than any other sector in society during the pandemic. So I've been working on co-ops and various versions of them for a number of years. In fact, my prior career was in healthcare for 30 years. And I guess that's where I cut my teeth in setting up a lot of joint ventures and cooperatives, all designed basically for the same purpose, working collaboratively to get access to resources and assets that you really can't do operating individually. So the first couple co-ops that I formed were actually LLCs. They weren't legal co-ops. And I've gone through a few iterations and then decided I really needed to create true cooperatives, because LLCs still allowed more of a bottom line ROI orientation than what a co-op does. And so that's when I started working with Jason, I'm guessing probably a year and a half or 2 years ago. And Jason won't say this about himself, but he has a very huge national reputation as one of the most important people operating in this area. And I think he's responsible for turning Colorado, or giving them the reputation of Colorado is to co-ops what Delaware is to leasing and finance organizations. So Jason's too modest to say that, so I'm going to put that plug in for him.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah. We always got to put in the plug.
I do get a finder's fee for this too. So that's good. That's good.
You'll Venmo me after this.
Transactions, I love it. Yeah, one thing that that struck me was going back to you, Jason. When you were saying, you were alluding to like how there needs to be. To me, it sounded like there needs to be more economic diversity. Like you were mentioning, we need a space where it's not just like another equity group, putting out a restaurant, another, profit-minded, profit-focused like investor putting out a cafe. This is a new model, right? That brings empowerment to employees, that brings employees to the table. And there was something that you mentioned in one of your roundtables that I, that struck me as like a great point to just reinforce, which is like you were saying, this all does still need to, what the movement that you're a part of and what you're for is, it still has to operate under under a profit model. Like it needs to be
Very
successful. Which I think people should know that, because I think especially in this climate where it's so polarized, people seem to think, oh, one or the other. You're either, strictly for, a co-op model where people might suddenly think, okay, like, oh, socialist movement, bad, or like, oh, capitalism, profit sharing, money growers, But I mean, it's just more like you're recognizing that there are people who need to have a voice, who are not getting a voice right now.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put my ideology aside and just focus on the facts. So cooperatives have been around and have been pervasive, widespread competitive business models in the United States for more than 300 years since the formation of the country, and for millennia prior to that in more indigenous communities. But the first mutual cooperative in America was Ben Franklin's Fire Mutual in Philadelphia. Why was it formed? Because communities and neighborhoods didn't have the resources on their own to protect those communities. So they banded together to accomplish what they couldn't do on their own. Just like John mentioned earlier, they obtained the resources and assets for mutual aid. And for centuries, the cooperative sector has been the invisible third sector in our economy. We're all familiar with the private sector, which is really another way of saying that it's a capital-led sector. The entire sector is driven not just for profit, but profit back to investors, capital-led profit. The other sector, the public sector, is really the extension of the private sector in so much as it's government programming to solve what the private sector will not solve. Philanthropy is the privatized public sector through excesses generated through profit maximization. The third sector, the cooperative sector, is the combination of both. It's really about generating profit in a more egalitarian and democratic way. It's about driving the value, the surplus value, back to the people who created it in the first place. It is absolutely not a nonprofit business model. Absolutely not. It operates in a capitalistic environment for the benefit to generate profit for its members. It's also not a communist business model. It was Ronald Reagan in 1983 who said, we need more capitalists, as he was promoting the ESOP model, to say we need more employee-owned companies because we need more capitalists. And it's cooperatives that are driving profit back to their members who are the ones who created the value in the first place.
Right. Thanks for breaking that down. It's fascinating. John, I mean, we gotta bring in your voice on this. I mean, in terms of your experience with, you talk about Chomp, talk about what your backstory about, how you started that and the impetus for that, because I feel like that is an example of a lot of what Jason was talking about, is like the desire. It's born out of a practical desire, right, to cut costs, to make things more practical, not have to deal with, just explosive fees that really hurt the pockets of the restaurant owners, right? Talk about that.
Sure. And Jason and I agree on a lot of stuff, but I do enjoy calling him a communist as he's talking about this. I think he was brought to this with a passion. I came into this because of a practical business sense, in that when I retired from healthcare and opened up a restaurant in Iowa City, and my restaurant, it was probably the top delivery service in the city for University of Iowa students. And we started to work with some of these marketplaces as they evolved. And in the beginning, they offered very nice services at very reasonable rates and very good customer service. And what we found out is that's how they induced us to wade into the tar pit that became third-party delivery, because once they got substantial market shares, they doubled their commission rates, they fired all the customer service, and it became clear that they were just another tech business trying to extract money from the restaurant sector. And there's when you got average margins of 3 to 5%, you can't take a 30% commission plus 30+% on a food order. So we had a bit of a crisis in Iowa City when Grubhub got a monopoly there and did this. And there were a lot of restaurants that were stressed even more than what happened to them during the pandemic. So I worked with 20 other restaurant owners. I was co-founder of Chomp when we started, and I basically used the entire business model that I had been using in healthcare, ironically, because as I said, it's the concept of a co-op applies to many different sectors. And as an aside, I think it may be one of the most important emerging future business models, as a reaction to what tech is doing to the country, extracting incredible amounts of money. So anyway, I put 20 restaurant owners together, or I worked with 20 restaurant owners to come up with this. And we pretty much had success from the beginning. We did a significant amount of deliveries, and we were able to provide commission rates that were significantly less than the competitors. And what I'm doing now has no, that's a separate standalone LLC company. As I said, I've gone through a couple iterations now, but I've moved towards more of this, of a true legal co-op concept, which requires that every restaurant that participates with it is eligible to receive patronage benefits. We also have structured it so that it allows investors, and that's something Jason helped us with. The co-ops can allow investors, which is kind of different than how people think of them. I have to admit, prior to meeting Jason, I probably would have said co-ops tend to be more of a nonprofit orientation. And I worked, all of my healthcare years were in nonprofit, which is, I think, where some of the passion to helping the community comes from. But no, they are business units that can generate significant revenues, but doing public good at the same time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I think that one thing that I'm wondering though, it's like pretending that I'm a business owner. In theory, an idea like the idea in terms of doing good, right, for the community, it sounds great. But in terms of cost, I mean, when I see something like the stuff that you've been building, John, if I'm a business owner, it seems like it makes sense to me, because it's more like delivery is just like a part of my overhead that I do want to keep the cost down, and I'm not really trying to look to profit off of something like that because I'm a restaurant, I want to make money. But Jason, for you, it's like, what do you say to a business owner that's thinking like, well, I could sell to a place like New Street Phoenix, but then here's another buyer that wants to offer me a bunch more money. Like, yeah. What would you say in that situation to that hypothetical restaurant?
Well, there's no free lunch, and I think every restaurant owner knows that. Pun and no pun intended there. And what the pandemic has shown us is that the real underlying value of restaurants cannot be quantified. And the reality is private equity will not pay most sellers what they think the business is worth. These are largely non-financialized business assets. And I think this is part of the reason why we don't see a strong private equity play in restaurants. There's an untapped market. It's frankly undervalued because we know that these independent restaurants are operating at low margins. They don't generally benefit from professional management. The groups are doing a lot better managing their costs, their prime costs. They're better staffed to move their labor around. They can manage better distribution cost, supply chain, negotiate better lease rates. We're experiencing this already on deal number 2. We've improved our cash flow on our second location just by negotiating better distribution net terms and by issuing corporate guarantees on our lease instead of personal guarantees. Scale has benefits, and independent restaurants don't have scale. So when you look at a 1% to 3% margin business and you strip out whatever value the owner was taking and you apply any rational EBITDA multiple, these are not financially valuable assets. They don't generally own real estate, and the equipment itself right now is flooded on the market. So, the first thing is restaurant owners, I think they do understand that. And we've been true to our hypothesis. They've been overwhelmingly positive about this approach. They love the fact that there's somebody out there speaking to them about taking care of their workers. And my belief is 90+% of restaurant owners who are in business for the right reasons care about and would love to do more for their workers. They know that they're the lifeblood of not just their business, but their legacy and their community. Restaurants aren't just food engines. They're pillars of community, and they attract people who come for the concept and the feel. And maybe it's their favorite servers. Maybe it's the the routine or the habit. So restaurants, I think, are, underappreciated from financial markets, and we can immediately generate greater value through scale. And by telling the sellers that, the workers come first, we have a competitive advantage, frankly, and they're willing to sell for less as long as we can make good on our promises. They would rather see their business go to somebody who, as a steward, than somebody who's just going to take out a bunch of debt and sell this thing off for parts in 3 years. I firmly believe 90% of selling owners on any listing site would be hard pressed to not care about what we're doing, and have told us that.
One thing that is so timely about this is, we just posted an article the other day. I'm gonna post the link in our comment section. A trend that's happening to the Great Resignation in the employee trend. Employees ghosting their employers. They quit. They don't even give notice. There's statistics included in our article. Pew Research Center survey. Majority of workers who quit a job in 2021 63% cited low pay as a reason why they quit and ghosted. 63% said no opportunities for advancement as a reason why they left and they ghosted. Feeling disrespected at 57% of people, of surveyors. I mean, so it seems this is, what you guys are doing. I mean, it's very timely,
These statistics highlight epidemic.
Problem. I'm sorry?
These statistics highlight the epidemic that has been brewing in the sector for decades. Restaurant workers, it's one of the only sectors of the economy where the worker has to generate their income directly from the customer. Domestic workers and restaurant workers and other hospitality workers. The reason for that is a 150-year-old policy of leaving restaurant workers and food delivery workers out in the cold, out from wage protection. Now, when you put that burden on the worker, they are in a fast-paced, high-stress environment. Most managers are just trying to get through the day. It's no mystery. It's no wonder. And I don't blame the restaurant owner. I don't blame management. I blame the kind of endemic conditions in which restaurant service exists, and now the pressures faced by big tech companies. Let's talk about the ghost kitchen phenomenon. Let's talk about the monopoly extraction of, Uber Eats, DoorDash, because what they're doing is insidious and invisible, and it's pulling apart the fabric of community. I mean, restaurant after restaurant is leaving vacant sore spot blemishes in every one of our communities. These aren't just places people order food from. These are places where people work, families dine, tears are shed, memories are made. I mean, these things have real emotional connection for all of us.
Yeah, John, I see you nodding your head there. You have anything to add to that?
Oh, no, I love the passion in what Jason's saying, and I agree with that. I think, I'm old. I'm probably twice as old as any of you guys on this call. I grew up in a small agricultural town in Michigan, and we had a downtown, and there were 2 independent pharmacies and an independent this and an independent that, and that's where everyone came and they met and they talked. Well, malls were the first thing that started to destroy that social infrastructure in the community. And then you had, Amazon come in and start to destroy all of the independent retail. The last bastion of independent retail and opportunities for people to socialize, in my mind, obviously my rhetoric is a little strong here, is the independent restaurants. And now they are under siege by the Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber. And I think municipalities, like during the epidemic, making just bad decisions about, or decisions without consideration of their impact on some of these independent restaurants. I mean, my personal opinion, I started working in restaurants in high school and college. I didn't have the guts to open up my own restaurant, so I went and worked for people after coming out of my schooling. And then when I retired, I went back to restaurants. I mean, they're an important part of my life. And I don't think there's a part of this country or a sector that's threatened more than that. And I also think, Jason talked about a lot of the things that restaurants do, but they're places where people go and socialize and talk to each other anymore. For the most part. Now, if you go in my restaurant dining room, because I've got mostly University of Iowa students in it, it'll be quiet. They're all on their phones, and they're all texting. But the true independent restaurants, to me, they're just such an important part of society. And these are where Jason and I overlap on our political views. I still think he's a communist, but
whatever you believe, whatever it takes to get on the same page to solve problems for the people we care about, I think that's, as you say, this is something we break bread over in a restaurant. So
I'd like to jump in here. I have a question for Jason. We're talking about how you kind of take care of the employees here. And when I was doing my research, I saw on your website you target a 30% turnover rate. And I know the industry average is over 100. I think it was 106%. Obviously, there is a lot of lost productivity in retraining people. But I'm wondering, what kind of steps do you take to try to retain employees here? Is it just the fact that they have a little bit of ownership, or is there something more to it?
I would say that's only a small part of what we're offering. So the first thing is we're solving the endemic conditions from the bottom up. So our managing director, Sewell, has more than a decade of experience as a restaurant consultant, building culture and doing open book management with everybody from the floor manager to the dishwasher. And we're first and foremost about investing in the culture to create quality, sustainable jobs. That means that we are addressing the root cause of toxic culture in restaurants. We're addressing language and culture gaps. We're creating empowerment through education. We're also communicating metrics transparently and uniformly across the restaurant, so everyone understands that from every step they take, they're having an impact on the bottom line of the business and the experience of the customer. We're also using our scale to drive costs down. We're freeing up resources and money to create better benefits. There's one restaurant group here in the Denver area that brought an in-house mental health worker, and they immediately saw a reduction in turnover. Well, that's actually the core of what we're doing. Our entire thesis is, with every extra penny we have, what resource can we make available to workers so that they are happier, they stay longer, they're more motivated, and they make the restaurant more profitable, whether that's mental health resources, paid vacation time, paid health insurance, dental and vision. There's another pizza chain in Denver, Sexy Pizza. They have a 100% medical dental vision plan, 401k, and they have a phantom stock plan for their workers. It's basically a cousin to what we're doing. And I think that we can exceed our goal of reducing turnover to 30%. And the way to do that is also by listening. The first thing we did when we bought Griffin was to go in there on a listening tour. What is working? What isn't working? What are your ideas? And immediately we saw morale go up. And now one person left, and we've seen an even greater enhancement of morale. There are these invisible drags on culture when management isn't trained or prepared to think of the restaurant as a living organism or an organization. And with very inexpensive techniques, we're able to improve culture, improve outcomes, and reduce turnover. So ownership is actually a very small piece of that. And it's the way that we recognize all of their investment in the big picture. And it's a way of giving people a sense that they matter.
I mean, but how do you, if I can ask, like, specifically speaking, I mean, how do you determine how much workers can own? Like, how does that work? Like the shares and.
Well, that's what's easy and beautiful about the cooperative model. There's no traditional equity. We're not slivering up a pie and dividing equity. So our concept is we buy restaurants, coffee shops, and breweries as subsidiaries. And we bring the workers of those locations in at the holding company level as a cooperative. What that means is every worker owner has one vote, no matter how much capital they've invested, no matter their job title, no matter how much they're paid. One worker, one member, one vote. And what they share in is the profit at any given year. The profits derived from all of our locations pulling back up to the parent. And the profit sharing is based on this unique feature of cooperatives called patronage. Patronage is the value created relative to everyone else. So if I contribute more labor, more hours, I get a larger share of the profit. But my contribution is no more valuable than a dishwasher who's working the same number of hours. We're all indispensable in creating value. And that's recognized holistically across the organization. So we don't actually have to go through any rigmarole, any complicated math to divide up equity.
Interesting. One thing that I do want to bring up, we have a question here from Kelly Beaton. It says, how does Jason suggest selling the co-op concept to prospective hires in a manner that gets them excited about working for his business? And I think that's an interesting question because I saw another roundtable. You guys had quite a few events at MSPP, so I was taking a look at them. And you had a really interesting guest on in one of them. Rima Sale, I think is what her name is. She's a restaurateur. She has experience working in a co-op, and she's also incorporated the co-op model in her own business. And she said something interesting, like when she was working in a co-op, she said one of the biggest things for her was transitioning into the mindset from being a worker to like a worker owner. That took her a long time. So I feel like this question is really relevant because it sounds great. Again, it's like, it sounds like a great idea, empowering the worker, but that's also psychological. That's a big shift. Like, what does that even mean to them? All of a sudden they have a vote, but it's like, do I understand what I have to decide about and things like that? So yeah, if you could shed light on that question too. And John, weigh in too afterwards, please.
Well, the first thing is not everyone wants to be an owner. Not everyone's cut out to be an owner. And that we have to make that okay. And that is okay. We are identifying people with ownership mentality, or the people with the capacity to behave and think like owners. And when we buy a location, they don't become owners right away. We go through a rigorous onboarding and training process, and the workers aren't eligible to become owners for 6 to 9 months. And in that period, we're going through a lot of deprogramming and a lot of training and a lot of development to ascertain people's professional development goals. There are baristas who just want to barista for, a year or two and then go off into their next thing, and that's okay. But we're looking at identifying people who have the passion to develop in the sector. And we're finding people, that have just never been asked the question, what do you want for your career? What do you love about what you do, and how can we support you? And so a lot of that is conversation. A lot of that is building rapport and identifying the traits of people with the intrinsic motivation to advance and the people who are open to receiving training. So that takes 6 to 9 months, at which point, we've gone through assessing. There's a lot of training on our model. And, at the end of that, when they're eligible to be admitted, our buy-in is $1,500. It's not a free lunch. We're asking people to make meaningful contributions to join ownership. And that can be, paid right away or paid later. But the reality is it's not for everybody. And what that means is also that's a very meticulous training part of the process as well, because ownership does not mean that all of a sudden everybody gets to call the shots and manage the location. We have to understand that ownership and management has a role and a place. They're still workers. They're still performing a job. The difference is they now have a line of sight to see how their value translates into the bigger picture and how they benefit from it. And there are specific venues in which ownership conversations take place and where their vote, where their franchise is expressed. And that's not on the restaurant floor. That's in specific locations around specific topics.
Right, that's great. Thanks for explaining that, Jason. Something that I wanted to direct to you, John, in light of what Jason was explaining about how that process works, is one thing that I was thinking of is, John, with your extensive experience, you may have touched upon it, I think earlier, in healthcare management, what you've had to deal with in sort of like wrangling, the politics between, healthcare entities. It transitions you into this new space, of what you're doing. But now, what are the things that you've seen, you through your work with Chomp, now what you're doing with LoCo and Go LoCo, this collective of restaurant owners, with this delivery service. I mean, but you have different entities, different personalities. I mean, what's that aspect been like? That must have been challenging. I mean, talk about that, what you've seen and what you're seeing,
well,
how you handle it with those types of things.
After 30 years of working with doctors, I can tell you they have a lot in common with independent restaurant owners. They typically, they really don't want people messing with them. They're very proud of what they've done. They're not used to working. Nowadays, probably more so since I retired. They're not used to being trained to work collaboratively. And you've seen one, you've seen one. And so I guess coming into the restaurant side, that's what's helped is it's all about aligning incentives. And I worked a lot of years to kind of craft that. It's like you got to find the basic spot where everybody agrees, and then you can start to move forward. And that's what really takes the time when you're trying to put a co-op together, because it people like farmers tend to be very independent, but they know they need a grain silo and they can operate it better than someone from the outside. But even then, I'm sure that when you go to a farmer's co-op, there are disagreements that come up there. But basically, if an independent, you look at restaurants, like I said, they're the last bastion of independent retail. The only way they're going to survive going forward and not become, have the same fate as the corner pharmacy is identifying areas where they just have to work. They just have to collaborate. I mean, they cannot take on third-party delivery by themselves. And you'll hear me mention third-party delivery, but there's a whole host of other tech-based predators in the restaurant space, whether it's the POS or now the middleware that connects your third-party delivery to POS. That sector is just coming in. And what they do is they negotiate decent rates with Chili's and McDonald's and whatever, and subsidize it by charging extraordinary rates to independent restaurants who have no leverage and no ability to work together. So, I know Jason comes to this with his heart. I'm coming to this with, it's just smart business sense to say, if this sector is going to survive, you got to do this. You may not like working with other people, but the reality is if you can't do that, you're going out of business. And there's not a lot of money, as Jason said, being paid for your business anymore. It used to be 3 to 4 times EBITDA, but I doubt it's close to that anymore. So sorry, I think I rambled a little bit there.
No, that's in this live stream. We want rambling. We want we want conversations like this. It's good. It's good. This is how we formulate our thoughts. Chris, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question I'd like to ask John a little bit, and it's kind of concerning geography, right? So I know that this delivery model, probably works. I hate calling them like second or third tier cities. It sounds so demeaning, right? But is this a model that can work in New York City or LA? Do you find that this could work there, or is it going to be like a bunch of little satellites that could work, independent cooperatives, but a multitude of them? How does that kind of work out in your mind?
Well, you can really only have one co-op in a market. And my ideal market is, Fort Collins, Colorado. It's Madison, Wisconsin. I like to have a university close because that tends to offer a much more eclectic menu of different types of independent restaurants. And most of my markets have been that size, although we have established co-ops in Las Vegas and Tampa. And big markets are a challenge. I've been working on Chicago for 5 months, and we've got aldermen involved in that. We've got community leaders, very influential restaurants. But Chicago is probably close to 50 times bigger, well, not than Vegas and Tampa, 50 times bigger than what I would consider the ideal market. But when you look at Chicago, I mean, another reason these co-ops are good, like for a city like Chicago, is there's probably close to $300 million a year leaving Chicago in restaurant commissions, going to Silicon Valley, or I guess the headquarters of Grubhub, which are in Chicago. But the bottom line is that's out of the restaurants' pockets. Omaha, Nebraska, where we are, there's $30 million that's leaving that market. If you were to convert totally to a cooperative model, which I've talked to Jason about trying to do this, and he tells me it's basically illegal or not fashionable anymore. But say Omaha said, we're going to grant a license to a co-op to do all of the restaurant delivery. $25 million a year would stay in the city of Omaha. We look at that when we're going into markets, because the municipalities are interested in that. I mean, they are interested in trying to keep things at home, but Jason is familiar with another co-op in New York City called the Drivers Co-op, and I think you've helped them in also. They have 4,000 or 5,000 independent drivers who have come together to create an alternative to Lyft and Uber, because these tech firms have just extracted so much money out of these cities, and they're not providing requisite value that represents what they're taking out. Like when we develop a co-op in a city, the cost of delivering that product is about 15% of what tech firms charge to do that delivery. And I think that's pretty similar with what New York City is looking at as what it costs them to do independent delivery versus Lyft and Uber there. So
I want to make a follow-up point to you, John. Completely agree. And there's one thing for folks looking at, where's the blue ocean here? Where's the opportunity? It should be noted that, these co-op models actually in many respects today are following where the tech companies are. And the tech companies are largely following the 30-year-old rift between organized labor and corporate. Anytime there has been an erosion or decomposition of organized labor power, tech has largely come in to intermediate. It's arbitrage, and they have sucked up the power in that system, whether it's taxi drivers, food delivery, even social media, through the deregulation of media and the FTC's hands-off approach. And what has swooped in is tech. Cooperatives, unfortunately, are the kind of countermeasure that are developing behind the curve and without the resources. So what can people do? It's not think of the next idea to unseat the dominant utility. Rather, it's this sector, frankly, just needs help conveying its message and organizing people to retake that power. And that sounds idealistic, but the reality is it's a very simple John, I don't know if you would agree, but when you finally talk brass tacks, the value proposition sells itself. I think a lot of people are skeptical, but this isn't about, showing restaurant owners how they can make money on food delivery. It's about how they can recoup orders of magnitude costs that they're already spending. It's recouping overpayments. And so that value prop is self-evident. It's clear. We just need to be able to showcase that it works. And that means overcoming people's skepticism. And that's the hard part.
Right. I resonate with that in the sense that, it's really like a perspective thing here. It's really like changing people's perspectives and changing people's mindset about what do they value and what is important at large. I mean, everyone wants to make money and everyone wants to see a big profit, but in especially in light of the pandemic that's happened, it's like what really is really important. Right. And it's like, what really should you be, investing in, especially, when it comes to, preserving the local businesses, preserving the community, like using things like Chomp and Go LoCo to, keep up those, local businesses that are so beloved and having options like Main Street Phoenix Project for beleaguered restaurants that could have been fine if not for the pandemic and just they need a way to keep going, and that people want them to keep going because they're such a part of the community. I mean, that seems to me the big point here. It's like, it's about community, like just preserving the community that's really been, been hit hard. Yeah. Chris, did you have any other thoughts or questions that you wanted to?
This is a little bit of a turn, but I do have a question for Jason. Another thing I pulled off your website. One of the facts I thought that was really interesting, you had a 51% minimum for BIPOC and women directors and executives. Can you tell me a little bit about how that kind of plays into the mission overall and, just kind of the day-to-day with trying to maintain that kind of percentage?
Yeah, this is a really important fact that I don't think enough kind of impact investors and social justice advocates really understand. Existing industries and sectors are places where social justice principles can be practiced. Restaurants and hospitality have been overrepresented by women, people of color, and undocumented workers for over 100 years. And this is the invisible workforce. The undocumented workforce in restaurants is invisible, and yet it's the necessary lifeblood that keeps restaurants functional. And we just choose not to talk about it. But because the sector is overrepresented in this way, this is one of the easiest and most impactful interventions for racial economic justice. And having open conversations now about racial equality, gender equality, we don't have to reinvent the wheel to have a big impact. And so all we've really said is we want our management and leadership to look like the restaurants and their workforces. And that's an easy thing because we're going after, restaurants where these demographics already exist. And we want to show people that there's upward mobility and that the people in leadership look like them. And that has a way of one, increasing morale and turning the tide on economic injustice in a way that doesn't take magnanimous conversations and discourse. It doesn't take politicizing the workplace. It's just really an honest acknowledgement of what's already true.
One specific question I had that I didn't get to ask is, I was really interested in, what specifically is entailed in, things like things like training for workers that want to choose that worker ownership, right? And they're given resources to educate themselves and to be educated. What goes on in that, in terms of are they given things like Finance 101? Like, how does it work, right? Like, are they given those kind of tools to make decisions when it comes time, for those kinds of meetings? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's, again, the expertise of our managing director, Marisol, who has developed training curricula and programs to do Finance 101, to talk about, and layer it into things that are relevant, like menu design and costing out your product, and thinking about, vendors like point of sale systems and food delivery service, and just bring some awareness. But a lot of that is programmatized. Marisol has training resources that we're able to bring. They've been vetted for years. She's working currently with restaurants all over the country. And so a lot of that is paid staff time, all hands meetings, and we're just getting into it now. So a lot of that is still taking shape. But we were really impressed. Our first acquisition, we sat down a day after the acquisition closed and asked the staff, do you all know how much money you make every day? And they're like, of course we do. We're looking at Toast every single day. We know, what Mondays look like versus what Wednesdays look like. I mean, we were impressed to know that, this is actually already happening. There's just no pathway for people to talk about it and act on this knowledge. So a lot of this is really just making this a more coherent program and then tying these things to metrics so that we can begin to drive profitability, which again, doesn't line the pockets of investors or owners. It actually creates resources and value for them. We are driving these metrics to show that we're profitable so that we can pay for health insurance and we can pay for dividends back in workers' pockets.
Another thing that I thought of, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but one perceived benefit I think from this too is like, it could be bridging the gap, between employer and employee. The employee will be able to see the things that the employer has to deal with, right? Like overhead and what that means, and breaking it down. So it's like, if it's not anymore like a versus, right? Like I want to get paid more, and the employer's like, no, but it's like now they're seeing eye to eye, and on the employer side too, looking into, okay, now I understand my staff needs to learn and understand what I go through, right? And also needs the needs of voice.
That's and I have an example of that. So in our coffee shop, we're looking at new ideas to increase top line revenue. So we're asking the staff about their ideas, and we're like, okay, great, that's an idea. How are we going to pay for it? Or they say we want to raise, we want to work more hours. Okay, how are we going to pay for it? So we're asking people to engage in developing mini business models. Okay, what would it look like to do a lunch program? Where would who are the vendors? What's the cost? How do we staff it? What's the return on investment? And that's not for us, that's for you. And it's incredible that people have, we're seeing who has that innate ability and who has that interest and needs training. But this is not new science either. There's an entire evolution in organizational theory and management training to say people who are closest to problems are often best equipped to solve them. This is really about upper level management getting out of the way and saying, what do you need to do your job better and be happier to make more money for us and for you? And frankly, they mostly know what that means. And it's just about supporting their development to connect the dots. And when we get out of the way, we're so impressed. I mean, we've seen change like that just by asking questions and supporting people who already have good ideas.
That's awesome. We have an interesting question from a one Brian Choi for John. Should Uber Eats and DoorDash be scared of LoCo as the co-op expands across the U.S.? John, go for it.
Yeah, there was actually a quote from a gentleman named Jim Sanderson, who's a very influential equity research analyst at a North Coast Equity Research. He was quoted in a Bloomberg article asking that very question about work I was doing and was it viewed as a threat. And he said, if I were them, I'd be shaking in their boots. Now, that was very flattering for Jim to say that. But the issue is for people like Jason and myself, we don't have the access to capital that those guys have. Those guys, you know, if we had 10% of the combined cash reserves of Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber, no, 3%, we could fix the independent restaurant industry, put it back on its feet, and it would be wonderful again. But you know, that's the hurdle we have when we're starting this co-ops, is how we capitalize them. And I can tell you, Jason and I are both involved in equity crowdfunding campaigns right now, trying to, you know, because a VC, PE, or angel has no interest in what I'm doing. Their first two questions are, how quickly can I get my investment back, and how many multiples might I get on it? So, you know, I think both of us felt we decided to go the WeFunder route because it's more grassroots. And, you know, I'd rather have, you know, 10,000 people give me $100 than 2 people give me $500,000. We also, you know, the VCs and PEs and angels, they tend to be pretty intrusive, and they're going to, like you heard me say before, co-ops can't run on a bottom line mentality. I mean, they can't go out of business, but they need to think in terms of the co-op. And it's an entirely different mindset that those folks have.
But John, let's, you know, some real talk here. We're not talking about charity. We're not talking about donations. We're talking about investing, and both of us are offering rates of return. I would posit, you know, at least on the Main Street Phoenix side, my plug is we closed our investment round in 1 day, so jump in now. We're offering roughly an estimated 10.5% IRR on a portfolio. That's not bad in today's environment. And John, I know that you all have done intensely rigorous work on your financial projections, and yours is, you know, also really not bad. These are really competitive aggregate rates of return. And it's telling. I mean, I think we currently are up to over 60 individual investors. Many are at $100. There is no shortage of appetite for this at the grassroots. To me, this is just a blind spot of traditional finance and a blind spot of impact investing in foundations who don't understand that these cooperatives are driving impact at the same time as creating value, financial value. But these are not donations. We're not asking for charity, and we're not asking for people to take, you know, serious haircuts so that, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I get that. This is not like your usual GoFundMe cause thing. This is, you know, this is a business minded, it's an investment. You know, there's a commitment to it, and in turn there can be a profit from it. Again, you know, to me, you know, in learning of all this, again, it's like it's all about the mindset, the change in mindset. And you know, because the return is not only financial, but it's intangible. It's the community that you get, that you're saving, right? Yeah. So really enlightening stuff for me. Hopefully for all of you guys out there. You know, final question that I have, kind of to wrap it all up. The future of co-ops. You know, what are you guys thinking about that? Do you guys want to see a landscape across the US of A covered in co-ops, or is this just, you know, a valuable, should it have a valuable place in the marketplace? You know, let's hear your thoughts about this, guys.
I think Jason set this up, and I hadn't thought of this perspective before, where he talked about, you know, how tech followed and what follows tech. And my own personal belief is tech has done a lot of damage to the country in the past, I don't many years, and that I believe the country is ready to start pushing back at that. And a lot of this is tech's predatory way of extracting from communities and not really providing value that does that. So I do believe there's a huge opportunity for co-ops to just start identifying where are those other opportunities, the DoorDashes, Grubhubs, or what the drivers co-op has identified in Lyft and Uber. There's probably a lot more out there that would be suitable for a co-op. Sorry to take so much time, Jason, go ahead.
No, that's great. I mean, I don't think that there's a utopia here where co-ops, you know, where like, you know, the amber waves of grain, it's co-ops everywhere. But I do think I've been working with co-ops for the last 12 years. My firm has worked with over 150 co-ops across North America. I've sat on numerous co-op boards. And I think that what we need to see is an honest conversation about the externalities of traditional corporate consolidation, tech monopolization, and we need to better understand what we as a society are willing to do to manage the concentration of that power. And that means that all of us have a role to play in organizing and supporting co-ops with our purchasing power in our communities. And I think that there is a place for co-ops. I don't see a day where there's a co-op for everything. There needs to be a sustainable mechanism. These things do need, you know, we operate in a capitalistic society, and, you know, John could tease me all day long, but I'm very much aware of that, and frankly, don't necessarily want that to change. I want the spoils to be more equitably divided. And I think that there are interventions throughout our economy that can benefit from more cooperative. I would like to see the market share, frankly, level off a little bit more. But I don't see us ever getting to a place where, you know, cooperatives have fundamentally taken over and it's now the other 99%. But I wouldn't mind if it were closer to 20 to 30%.
There you go. You heard it. You heard it here on FI Live from communist Jason Wiener. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I'll take it.
Just joking. But I think this was an awesome conversation. Lots of good insights. Jason, John, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us all about the co-op model in the food industry. Really exciting. Looking forward to seeing where MSPP and LoCo and LoCo are going to go. Thanks again, guys. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, as always. Chris Campbell, FI Content Manager, podcaster extraordinaire. Please do not miss his excellent podcasts. And also, you know, like, comment, share Food Institute, foodinstitute.com for all of your food industry media needs. You know, we will be back soon with episode 3 of FI Live. And, you know, we thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. All right. Thanks again. Bye.